Tenemos un panel de 3 personas. Manuel Rodríguez Becerra, primer ministro de Medio Ambiente de Colombia. Andrew Mitchell, director del Global Canopy Program en Londres.
Oxford.
Y,
Oxford.
¿sí? ¿En Oxford? Ah, claro. Y James Cameron, fundador de Climate Change Capital. ¿Sí? Muy bien. Y entonces tenemos 3 visiones representadas: ciencias, gobierno, inversores y sector privado. Vamos a empezar con una presentación de Andrew que nos va a meter un poco en este concepto de las selvas tropicales como grandes máquinas verdes y qué es lo que esto significa para las políticas, las inversiones y las acciones que podemos planificar para el 2012. ¿Sí? Entonces, should we get started?
Okay.
And
We're
we'll
a little
then
late, so
no, we'll
right?
yeah,
10
same
minutes.
timing,
Yeah.
and we'll catch up as we go. So if you just want,
all right. Do you want me to start? Okay.
you can start, and then we'll do the panel.
I don't know whether to sit down or whether to stand up, but I prefer standing up. So I'll do that. And I'm sorry, I'm going to speak to you in the most populous language. So I'll speak to you in Chinese. If I could. Well, do you want to turn that around or you can see a little bit? Pedro and Alejandro have asked me to say a few words about forests, which is a great passion of mine. I'm a zoologist, and I'll just go by a Newtonian view of natural capital economy. I'll explain that as we go along, what I mean by that. But much of my life has been spent hanging around in the tops of large tropical forest trees. And that's not me, but actually it could be. And I used to spend a lot of time building walkways and so on. This gives you a new view of life. When scientists first started climbing in the tops of these trees, we were astounded at how much life was up there. I could get handfuls of new species. Some of them look like this. What is it? A leaf? A leaf with legs? It doesn't really matter what it is. It's unbelievable that evolution can create something like this. And our vision of conservation for the last 30 years, driven by many organizations, World Wildlife Fund represented, where are you? Somewhere here. Fantastic organization. I remember Max Nicholson, who helped to start it up. Our president of World Wildlife is here, Yolanda, and Peter Scott, you know, when they all set it up. And it gave us a view of nature, which was that the reason we should save these wonderful forests was because of the intrinsic existence value of biodiversity, and also, of course, for the communities, indigenous, extractivists and farmers who live in and around the forests. And the big problem, I've spent 35 years trying to do that, and the problem is it doesn't really work. Or we wouldn't have a problem with deforestation rates so high around the world. And the reason is, it is about money. Because no one will give me $1 billion for that bug, no matter how well I try and sell it. And it's billions of dollars that are ranged against forests all over the world in huge interest. So I realized I had to come out of the trees, and this is what I should be looking at. On the left-hand side, all the magic of biodiversity. And on the right-hand side, the magic of Magi. That's not very fair for Grupo Magi, but, you know, huge interests of money and banks that are pouring money into the conversion of forests for agriculture. That is a Latin American phenomenon. It's not the same in Africa, and it's not the same in, it is to some extent the same in Indonesia. So we should be looking at this interface, not the canopy atmosphere interface, I thought. And so I spent a lot of time working with financial institutions in capital markets around the world, particularly London, to examine this interface and see how we could use money to be a force for good rather than bad in this situation. And this is my Newton problem. On the left-hand side, you have no force pushing outwards that's equal and opposite to the economic forces pushing inwards. That's one of the great dilemmas with these forests. So it's something we need to look at. So we need a new way to look at these forests. I don't know, some of you here may remember Bob Hope, a famous American comedian in the middle there. And I loved the road films that were made by Bob Hope, Bing Crosby, and others. And Bali was a turning point. It was our road. We're all on this long journey, a road to sustainability. But a key stepping stone on that road was Bali. And many people, many organizations, including my own, argued to include forests in the roadmap that led from Bali to where we are today in Mexico. And that was succeeded. Forests are now part of the evolving climate regime. And it's extraordinary how far we've gone in just a few years, because before Bali, forests were totally outside the regime. Most of the negotiators were from the energy sector and didn't understand what forests had to do with climate change at all. And in just a few years, forests have gone like in a horse race, from being the last horse in the race to being the favorite and the front runner. It's an extraordinary change. And that's all to do with the evolution of REDD+ and the carbon cycle and the opportunity to pay countries to stabilize their forest frontiers. We don't know yet how that's exactly going to work, but if there is an agreement this week, it will be a massive step forward, in my view. So we see forests slightly differently now. A way of looking at them that I propose is to see them like eco-utilities. Large pieces of green infrastructure that are vital for wealth creation and for sustaining life on this planet, not only in Amazonia, but also in the Congo Basin and the large forests of Southeast Asia. In the Convention on the UNFCCC, it's mainly seeing them in the carbon cycle. The smoke that goes into the atmosphere when forests are burned, but also the carbon that's taken out of the atmosphere as forests grow. And that's about a ton per hectare per year. That means these forests are taking out about 1 billion tons a year for free. And there's some other funny dilemmas. In my country, the previous government agreed to spend £15 billion on developing industrial carbon capture and storage. New machines to go on power stations to suck the CO2 out before it went into the atmosphere and pump it into the holes in the ground where we took the oil out of. 15 billion. No one has ever developed that technology. It's likely to cost somewhere between $100 to $500 a ton. And how much money did we give to forests which are taking 1 billion tons out of the atmosphere for free to help save forests? 300 million. There's something a little odd there going on, but I'm going to just leave that thought for you as to why that sort of decision is made. Well, so can we see forests as billion-dollar eco-utilities, and how would that drive our thinking in the future? That's something we can talk a little bit about today. But there's one thing that's very important. It's not just about carbon. Forests do, of course, much more than that. And the cycles, the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the biodiversity, the livelihoods they support are all equally important. And the idea of ecosystem services has come up, and can these be monetized? Can these create flows of money around the world for the ecosystem services that forests produce? What is their value to agriculture and to energy? Could it be the basis of a new kind of economy to see forests and green infrastructure in this way? I sometimes call this Virgilio's movie. Is Virgilio here still? No. It's a wonderful image that we've used around the world over the last few years to create this idea of how important the tropics are and forests for moving moisture around the earth. These forests are not the lungs of the earth. They are its beating heart, pumping water and heat around the earth. And if you look at where we are here in Central America and Amazonia, you can see how the water is pulled in, it goes around, hits up against the Andes, and then flows south in great plumes off to South Africa. We don't know very much about that cycle. Some of it's going up into the Caribbean, some may end up as far as Europe. But if you take out the Amazon, and there are models that have done that, and the Congo Basin and other areas, some interesting things happen. It looks like it could affect areas as far north as North America, but more likely, what you're seeing is an eco-utility that operates around the basin here. 9 countries, 1 Amazon, but its services are worldwide, and particularly down to La Plata, the big agricultural heartland of Latin America. So it raises some interesting questions. Just look at some of these figures. 8 trillion tons of water vapor evaporated each year out of the Amazon. That's moving around the continent and keeping the soy fields of Argentina going really well. So maybe the Argentinians should be paying money to the Amazonian states to keep the rain coming. That would raise some interesting political and legal implications. It's a huge, powerful mechanism. And we need to understand this, the political mechanisms and the funding mechanisms that it could generate. So we see perhaps, if you continue on this journey and this thinking, leading towards what might be called an emerging biosphere economy. And this is something that I'm working on with other academics around the world, particularly in Amazonia, funded by the UK government and others, to look at the impact of Amazonia on foods, on the 5 securities, not just 3. Climate, water, food, energy, and livelihoods. You can remember them on the palm of your hand, and they're really important for the whole region. And the problem is that the wheel of fortune is broken because the services of the forest are not included in the economy. And the people who maintain the services, the communities who live in and around the forest, are not rewarded for doing so. These impacts of change are now, not in the future. In 2005, there was a very big drought in Amazonia, and we thought, well, that'll never happen for many years. And this year, it's happened again, and is even worse. In the beginning of the year, we had some of the highest water levels recorded at Manaus, and this year, some of the lowest later on. Colombia has just suffered in the last few weeks of terrible rains and the biggest flooding, I think, in your country. We don't really know why this is happening. Scientists can't tell you whether it's caused by deforestation or climate change, but it is happening. And what we can be sure of, though, is that a more resilient forest, one that is not degraded over time, is probably going to lead to a more resilient economy. There have been big problems with this. A lot of the communities are suffering. The fish are dying on the banks, so are the cattle are dying on land. The soy barges couldn't get out of Mato Grosso. The fires causing airports to close and many people to go to hospital. There are real economic costs. So natural capital is an opportunity to create financial flows around the world in a new way and at a scale that's never been seen before. And who owns all this natural capital? I think this is another important political point. And the answer is, of course, countries or regions like Latin America and the Caribbean are the biggest owners of natural capital on the planet. This could change the geopolitical relationships between countries, because here is something that is providing a service the whole world needs. This provides an opportunity to move from aid to trade, and again, to create these financial flows based on the values of natural capital. But it carries many risks. Many, you will hear them in the negotiations here in Mexico. Many countries do not like the idea of paying for nature. Should there be a price on biodiversity? And what I would say to that is that the risks of going down this route are great. They are great. And we need strong safeguards, particularly for the communities. But I think the risks of not going down this route are greater if we do nothing. There's another risk out there. And this is where it connects between your world and mine. And that is that consumption is what's driving this around the world. Consumption patterns are changing very fast. And this was a headline in a local newspaper a year ago in my country. It just shows that there is a huge amount of awareness growing, and agriculture is something that we're really going to have a challenge about over the next 20 years. Someone is eating this eco-utility, and it's beef and soy and palm oil and timber, also oil, mining, and of course poverty. And it is spread right across the world. In my country, Europe is the largest importer of soy in the world, the second largest importer of palm oil. It goes into cosmetics, cakes, biscuits, everything that you see in the supermarkets, and nobody knows it's there. When you eat a big breakfast in Britain of bacon and sausages and eggs, you never think that the Amazon is sitting on your plate, because those chickens have been fed on soy and the pigs have been fed on soy that have come from the Amazon. So we're all in this together and connected. The challenge of agribusiness and the drivers of deforestation are something that we're really going to have to look at, and we might discuss a little bit more. There are emerging risks and opportunities here for companies. I started up something a year ago called the Forest Footprint Disclosure Project with support of the British government, and the chairman of the Carbon Disclosure Project is sitting right here, James, and we modeled the Footprint Disclosure Project on the Carbon Disclosure Project because, as I say, it's not just about carbon. And this is a proxy for natural capital. And there are reputational risks, environmental risks, regulatory risks, earnings risks, all coming down the pipe to companies. And the smart ones will pay attention and change now and become the leaders of the future. We could talk a bit about that. So some ideas for Rio Plus 20 just to leave you with is that I see forests as being, if you will, a proxy for a new kind of natural capital economy. It's a great way to understand how natural capital is included and underpins wealth creation worldwide. And so we should use it as an opportunity on the road to Rio to help people understand the importance of nature in the economy. Our language is often wrong. Words like biodiversity simply don't work in business very well. No big business accountant understands why they should have a bug on the balance sheet. I mean, that's just life. It's really difficult. So we should have a new language. Sustainability is even a difficult word because it helps us put the environment somewhere else and not at the heart of our lives, not at the heart of business, not at the heart of government. It's something that's kind of a luxury, nice to have, and that's totally wrong. We need to change that language and get it centered. So here's 3 things for policy, business, and civil society. Maybe we should look towards having a natural capital convention in Rio. I don't know what it would be in it, but it might be something to do with water, agriculture, and energy. We have the development agenda, the climate agenda, and the deserts agenda, the biodiversity agenda, all separate. This is crazy. Our conventions are not able to make decisions quick enough to take the action that we need. And that is partly a failure of democracy, I think. Because governments, democratically elected governments, cannot impose on their electorates the changes that are necessary, because they get voted out. It's that old phrase of turkeys don't vote for Christmas. And that's the politician's dilemma. Whereas in more totalitarian states or command and control states like China, moving ahead very fast, planting more trees than anyone else, going into renewable energy fast. I'll come back to that at the end. So politicians need to lead the way. What could we do in Rio that would lead the way? Think of what amazing leadership came out of Rio to produce not 1 but 3 conventions. We shouldn't be celebrating Rio and looking back. Exactly as Marina said this morning, we should be looking forward and being equally challenging, as inspirational, as visionary. What would it be? Business. Think pink. Now, pink stands for Proactive Investment in Natural Capital. And I published a little book in Nagoya at the CBD, which was the pink book, all about biodiversity. And everybody kept saying, why is it pink? It should be green. And I said, no, because it's about proactive investment in natural capital. And we looked at all the investments around the world that were going to help biodiversity. So I think business should be thinking pink in the future. And give you one action point, having natural capital accounts in business. The World Bank at Nagoya called for it to be done at governmental level, but why shouldn't business take account of the way it uses natural capital and report on it? For civil society, I think, and we should listen to what Kirsty has to say about this particularly, because the new media is something we've been talking about a lot this morning. What is the role of the new media in making things happen at Rio? Connecting people, connecting the world. And I invented a new word just a couple of weeks ago when we were thinking of this, because there's something in between democracy and totalitarianism that is evolving. And I call it the internocracy, which is the internet being used as a new kind of way of connecting civil society and putting pressure on government. It's fantastically powerful. I'll just give you an example that happened this week, which nearly prevented me from getting here. All the flight controllers in Spain wanted to go on strike. But if they went on strike, they knew they would lose their jobs because they're not allowed to go on strike because of the law. So they got on their mobile phones and used the internocracy to say, we're all going to take the day off sick. And they all reported around to each other, and nobody went to work. They said, we're off sick today. And they brought the entire European airspace to a halt. I'm not saying that was a good thing, but it shows the power of the internocracy in bringing about immediate and quick change. It's something new in our society. So I'll just leave you with those thoughts. 3 things to think of. I know there'll be many more, and we can carry on some of these ideas in our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Let's move on to a conversation. Estamos hablando de infraestructura por un lado, medio ambiente por el otro, y la forma en la que nos hemos organizado como países y como gobiernos es bastante dividida. Hay un ministerio de infraestructura y hay un ministerio de medio ambiente. Manuel, ¿cómo piensas que los gobiernos pueden responder a esta agenda integrada?
Lo que yo entiendo de la intervención de Andrew es que él introdujo el concepto de infraestructura ambiental, que es justamente los servicios, es el conjunto de ecosistemas que prestan unos servicios ambientales. Entre otras cosas, en Colombia está muy incorporado el tema de la infraestructura ecológica, que incorporó en el lenguaje un biólogo que ha sido un pionero, y está muy involucrado. Por ejemplo, hoy en día las ciudades de Colombia están definiendo su infraestructura ambiental, es decir, aquellos ecosistemas que son críticos para prestarle unos servicios ambientales a las ciudades. Y ya eso está en marcha. Y quiere decir que ese tipo de infraestructura se está comenzando a reconocer en Colombia como una cuestión central a la política ambiental. Pero no, yo diría lo siguiente, yo estoy de acuerdo con Andrew, que de Río acá se hizo un avance extraordinario. La agenda ambiental de hoy en día se estableció en Río, independientemente de que hayamos tenido éxito en las convenciones. Yo personalmente presidí durante 6 años las negociaciones de bosques, el panel intergubernamental de bosques y posteriormente el foro de las Naciones Unidas sobre bosques. Bueno, ese es un fracaso mayor de la negociación política en Naciones Unidas, que muestra, y ya nadie se acuerda ni siquiera que han estado negociando 22 años, estaban negociando los bosques. Yo dediqué 6 años, buena parte de 6 años a esta negociación. Eso fracasó, pero sin embargo hoy en día se retomó los bosques con lo de Red, que es muy interesante. Entonces, Río nos dejó una herencia enorme. Todos los países tienen una agenda ambiental que corresponda a la agenda que se fijó en Río. Y una de las cosas relacionadas con la región amazónica, donde los países amazónicos hicieron un avance extraordinario, es el hecho, no suficientemente apreciado, que hoy en día el 49.6% de la región amazónica está representada en resguardos indígenas y parques nacionales. Es decir, los gobiernos de Brasil en particular, Colombia, en menos grado otros países amazónicos, pero también todos ellos han sacado del comercio la mitad de la región amazónica, que es una decisión política extraordinaria. ¿Por qué lo hicieron? Por presión de la sociedad civil internacional, por presión de la sociedad civil doméstica. Hay también que tomar en cuenta que en la región amazónica están las reservas extractivas. Esta mañana estuvo con nosotros Marina Silva, que fue uno de las personas que concibió esto. En Colombia existe el equivalente, que son las reservas campesinas, que nuevamente están avanzando. Digamos, hay un avance que hicieron los gobiernos, por cualquiera que sea la razón, extraordinario, que en Río +20 tiene que ser reconocido y tiene que ser empujado por la sociedad civil, porque simultáneamente los gobiernos, en el campo sectorial, el de infraestructura, en el de minero, tienen una política totalmente antagónica con su propia política de los resguardos indígenas y los parques nacionales. Es muy interesante cómo los mismos gobiernos están autorizando en forma incremental todo tipo de proyectos de extractivistas en la región amazónica. El caso del Perú recientemente revelado por Mark Duroyani es muy impresionante. Hay 25.000 títulos mineros en la región Amazonia peruana. Hay 56 proyectos hidroeléctricos en fila. Hay 4.800 kilómetros de carretera. Entonces, ¿qué va a pasar con la Amazonía peruana? Acuerdo con Duroyani, si todos los proyectos se ejecutaran, el 90% de los bosques estarían profundamente degradados, desapareciendo para siempre el 25% de los bosques de la región peruana, de la Amazonía peruana, y solo conservándose el 10%. Entonces tenemos como dos fuerzas antagónicas en funcionamiento sobre la región amazónica, con los mismos gobiernos los mismos gobiernos con dos políticas antagónicas a su interior, y ahí es donde la sociedad civil puede jugar un papel muy importante buscando consolidar todo ese extraordinario proyecto que son los resguardos indígenas, los parques nacionales, y en eso, sin duda, el planteamiento de Andrew, ¿no?, de los eco-utilities, puede jugar un papel también muy fuerte, porque claramente parte del asunto tiene que ver con dónde están los recursos económicos para consolidar el proyecto, el gran proyecto amazónico de los resguardos indígenas, el gran proyecto amazónico de las reservas extractivas, el gran proyecto amazónico de los parques nacionales. ¿Dónde están los recursos? Bueno, los recursos evidentemente deberían provenir de un planteamiento como el que ha hecho Andrew. De todas formas, también Andrew planteó algo que creo que es fundamental para la agenda de Río, que es el tema de agribusiness. Sin duda, lo que está en juego, lo que pone en juego los grandes ecosistemas naturales de América del Sur, para hablar de América del Sur, pero también los de Centroamérica, es sin duda la necesidad de ofrecer más alimentos al mundo. América del Sur es visualizada como la última frontera, la última gran frontera agrícola del mundo. Y el mundo tiene que producir de aquí al año 2050 el doble de carne y el 70% más de granos. Entonces, ¿cómo se desarrolle esa oferta de alimentos? Es lo que va a determinar en buena parte el destino ambiental y social y económico de América del Sur. Porque si vamos a una agricultura insostenible desde el punto de vista ambiental, social, económico, bueno, económico no, pero desde el punto de vista ambiental y social podemos cometer un gran desastre. Entonces a mí me parece que relacionado con los bosques, fundamentalmente está el tema de cuál va a ser la política de provisión de alimentos. Y en la política de provisión de alimentos que estábamos conversando esta mañana justamente en mi mesa de trabajo, yo hablaba de expansión agrícola, pero resolví cambiar la palabra provisión de alimentos, pues es todo el tema de qué tan sostenibles son los patrones de consumo, qué efectos va a tener para el cambio climático, qué efectos va a tener para el agua, qué efectos va a tener para la sostenibilidad de los grandes ecosistemas. Todos los temas prácticamente ambientales y sociales, porque incluye naturalmente la tenencia de la tierra, la justicia social, la justicia ambiental, etcétera, van a estar fundamentalmente representados en el tema de provisión de alimentos. Y eso le interesa a toda la humanidad. Estamos hablando de la comida. Naturalmente, yo creo que seguir hablando de la Convención de Biodiversidad con todo el respeto a los ambientalistas, es tiempo perdido. Ese lenguaje no le interesa a los hombres de negocios. Yo, para terminar, como uno tiene que decir qué está haciendo en la práctica, yo estoy liderando en la Universidad de los Andes justamente un proyecto que trata de generar o trata de incidir en Colombia en una visión sobre la apertura económica de la región de la Orinoquia, que es la tercera parte del país, son 370.000 kilómetros cuadrados, de los cuales son 20% bosques, pero también hay unas pasturas que son muy importantes en temas de cambio climático, biodiversidad, etc. Y lo que hemos encontrado es que al sector privado le interesa el tema de la Orinoquia cuando le hablamos del agua. Cuando le hablamos de la biodiversidad los tiene sin cuidado, eso no lo entienden. Como decía Andrew, el tema de cuál es el valor intrínseco de una cucaracha que ha vivido 10 millones con nosotros de años, los tiene sin cuidado. El tema del agua los tiene con mucho cuidado y el tema del cambio climático y todo el tema de los patrones de lluvia, etcétera, también. Entonces yo creo que en Río +20 tenemos que ir. Yo no estoy seguro si es una convención sobre el capital natural. En Río +0, es decir, hace 20 años se habló de tener una sola convención, y Yolanda se debe recordar de eso muy bien, y no se quiso hacer una sola convención sobre la naturaleza por las enormes complejidades que tenía. Hoy en día tenemos una convención de cambio climático y es tan compleja que no podemos lidiar con ella. Yo no estoy seguro que uno pueda tener una convención que sea comprensiva, pero si eventualmente se hace una convención sobre la provisión de los alimentos en el mundo, que implica la sostenibilidad ambiental, social, cultural, económica, ahí sí está enfrentando un tema absolutamente central que tiene que ver con todos los temas. Entonces yo creo que en Río tenemos que concentrarlo en algunas cosas y yo propondría, entre otros, la agricultura.
Muchas gracias, Manuel. Espectacular. Let me now turn to my left to James Cameron, coming from a different space, connected to trying to mobilize financial capital markets in the financial city of London, trying to work with business leaders and mobilizing these constituencies and these communities towards these agendas. James, how do we effectively engage investors, banks, and business leaders from around the world, very, very practically, towards Rio +20 with this agenda? Well, what do we need to do? And can it be done? And can it be done realistically?
It's not a great deal of time to make a complete transformation in how we value the essential resources for life on Earth, which is really what is behind these propositions. So let me just make my assessment of where we are, and then I will turn to your question. We've made a modest start, beginning to value the externality associated with industrial emissions through putting a price on carbon in some parts of the world. And that experiment, because that's exactly what it is, at very early stages, has produced some good stories, a narrative of investment that provides some encouragement that we could move on to these absolutely necessary but more challenging revaluations of the vital assets for human society to thrive and prosper in a world affected by climate change. And that experiment has given some experience to the investment community about the risks and opportunities associated with a public policy-driven marketplace. But unfortunately, it's not all good. That marketplace doesn't function as well as it should do. The incentives are not as clear and not as long as they should be. They're not in as many places as they should be. Some very big markets like the United States of America don't exist yet. And so, before I go on to this, let me just say that we have little prospect of making these ideas, these necessary ideas, flourish if we can't make putting a price on carbon work. But at least we've made a start down that route. Now, I happen to think that there is an extremely exciting investment opportunity associated with the transformation that we are discussing. At the moment, it lies largely in resource efficiency, in finding value, in reducing inefficiencies associated with the way in we use all natural resources. Carbon is just a proxy for the better management of energy. the key nexus, the place where I think most opportunity lies for investment over the next generation, not just the next 2 years, is in the relationship between energy, water, and food, all of which have been mentioned in the first 2 presentations. And we don't concentrate intellectual effort, and certainly not investment effort, on that relationship. And part of the reason is we've taken for granted the provision of those services, as Andrew says, largely for free. And in some cases we've lacked the political courage to put a price on those assets because the interest in the way are too strong, or the fear of popular retribution come voting time was too strong. But we have absolutely no option but to focus on that relationship between energy, water, and food. You could add security to all 3, but that's what it's about. It's about human beings surviving and prospering in an environment where resources are scarce. They are fundamentally scarce, but they are being made more scarce by the consequences of our industrial development over the last 200 years. Right, so you said in the next 2 years, what are our chances? Well, it's obvious that we should place it at the center of the Rio+20 agenda. But 2 years is a very short time in negotiating time. Although I have to say, having been a veteran of these negotiations for many, many years, we did manage to go from a standing start to the Framework Convention on Climate Change signed in Rio in just a little over a year. I mean, those negotiations began in earnest in February and were completed in May the following year. Right? So it's not impossible to move things quickly. But to get the business community fully engaged, you have to appeal, this is a cliche, but it's true. You have to appeal to greed and fear. You also have to reconfigure what it means to be competitive. It's just a harsh truth that competitiveness arguments dominate discussions about the effect of any intervention by governments to reorient an economy, to shift around who wins and who loses. But mostly when businesses use competitiveness arguments, they don't want to compete. Actually, they want protection. Most competitiveness arguments are about, please look after me because somebody else is beating me in my own game. And it's the same with governments. So what we have to do is we have to take the competitiveness arguments and flip them upside down and argue as persuasively as we possibly can, flat out in this next 2-year period, that future competitiveness is based upon resource efficiency. The next wave of industrial innovation, of business innovation, is all about resource efficiency. And that needs repricing, but more broadly revaluing, because pricing is not quite enough. Pricing helps, but it's not the whole story. You have to revalue the assets upon which we depend to survive and prosper. Now, I happen to think we've got signs already that this industrial innovation is underway. The business innovation is underway. There are enough good examples. That doesn't mean to say that the power in our way has been moved. It has not. Moved a little bit here and there. But I'll give you a couple of examples of where I think there's hope in the transformation, and the business community will get it. The first is that we're already seeing signs of business innovation around resource efficiency. You're seeing businesses that are emerging with very, very strong balance sheets, highly well capitalized, very determined, very well organized, who will they will continue to grow and be very successful because they will help us manage resources more efficiently. And they tend to emerge out of another sector, not energy. They emerge out of ICT. Businesses like Cisco, who confidently predict they're going to offer a service to the world in managing these resources. But the clue in there is the shift away from valuing the commodity alone to valuing the service attached to it. We're seeing this in the automotive industry, just beginning to learn that the capital cost of a car is just a bit of a waste of resource. The way we use the car is inefficient in 100 different ways. Switching to a service associated with mobility looks interesting as a business model shift. When we start to put a price on carbon in more places, you will see huge innovation around industrial energy efficiency, as well as in green buildings and infrastructure that currently is wasteful of energy. Then we've got to put a price or have a value associated with water, and we've got to start to value hydrological systems, watersheds, and that feeds very much into the point made about the revaluation of land. So my final comment is largely to do with land and property. What will completely transform the fortunes of Latin American nations that are rich in natural resources is rethinking the value of land in 3 ways. 1, does the land contain adequate water resources? Is there something about the hydrological cycle that tells you this land ought to be worth more for what it has now and into the future? 2, is the land capable of generating energy, renewable energy in particular? Is there something in the nature of the land that allows you to see it as an asset from the point of view of generating renewable energy? And 3, is there something about the land that allows you to sequester carbon? Is there something about the land that also has a potential to maintain biological diversity? These ecosystem services, biological diversity, things like this that are not quite ready in many instances for the kind of direct valuation that you can have with carbon sequestered from an industrial energy project, although I think there are some very good examples from Andrew's work that can be applied directly, but some of the biodiversity ones are harder. Nonetheless, each and every piece of whether it's privately owned or publicly owned or a nation as a whole can look again at the value of land and answer, does that land hold the key to energy, water and food security? In which case, public policy needs to intervene to value the investment in that space. And then you will see capital move at scale into alleviating these severe risks that we face.
Thank you very much, James. If you think about the next 2 years and some of the processes that are already taking shape,
Yep.
And that might be the product of this workshop, is there one thing that you would like to see out there being pushed?
Well, okay, it's not a single, it's more of a cluster of things. First, there is work underway in the World Economic Forum on competitiveness. The forum has decided to integrate environmental matters in their regular review of competitiveness. This is quite an interesting opportunity to start to get some of these ideas to filter through, to define the nature of what it means to be competitive in a modern resource-constrained world. Secondly, it's vital that business, especially business from your part of the world, presents itself in the negotiating process in a confident, optimistic way, focusing on how to solve problems, to stop the very negative, very tired debate that business loses from this transformation. You know, which business, whose business? It depends. There are lots of businesses that win very, very strongly from the transformation that we must make. So we have to hear business present itself in this process so that government negotiators know that when they listen to business, there is a voice that is a progressive and confident voice that will show growth, economic opportunity, prosperity for the communities they represent from making the change that we've got to make. And there are ways in which that can be done. I mean, I think President Calderon has done a very good job at this meeting coping with difficult circumstances, because we're not going to have a great hurrah moment at the end of this week when everything is resolved. But he has made a good effort in making better business connections. And I think he's really serious about displaying the opportunities that do exist in building a growth strategy for countries like Mexico that are not dependent upon perfect success of the multilateral process, that are not waiting for money, technology, know-how to come from the wicked north and west. He's not doing that. He's trying to develop a national strategy that is about growth and dealing with these issues. And you've got to be present in those debates wherever you come from, so that that comes through in the negotiating process and makes Rio Plus 20. And for me, it's really quite an emotional thing. I will be one of those people, I can see others, who will turn up in Rio having been there 20 years ago. And as this argument has ebbed and flowed over the years, there have been many quite depressive moments. Right? Now, I think we've got 2 years to generate some real confidence, especially in the business, in the entrepreneurial community. I don't mean business I think we can redefine also what it is what business really is. I'm interested in enterprise. And I want enterprises who know that they can help solve these problems and do well as they solve these problems. That life can get better having addressed our resources in this direction. And why not have that spirit emerge from this community in Rio, as just to show the way that we can't carry on with these very negative trade-offs between economy and environment, business and government. And enterprise is a slightly broader concept than just business. It involves other characters and personalities, and it, on the whole, can be better turned to these really big systemic problems in a more confident way.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. We want to catch up with a bit of time. Can you join us in thanking the panel for this?